Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
And welcome to today's episode of Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. We are joined by Fab 3, Fab 4, Priyank, Mike, Chris, and myself, Lauren. And it's great to be here. So let's delve in, shall we? So we're speaking about our introduction today, but before we do, there is a quote that is in the beginning of the book, which we would love to delve into, which says, "Except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe," which is by John 4:48. Priyank, would you like to start us off?
So it's funny that we missed that. This is on like the third page of the book. As I'm holding it up for YouTube listeners, it's like opposite the page of Guruji's picture underneath the title of the book. Very small, very easily missable. And that is why we missed it. We're kind of going back. But yeah, Lauren, carry on.
So it's a great quote, I feel, for the start of the book. Before you even get to anything else, we are hit with that quote. So something I would like to ask you all is, how significant do you feel this is for the book, and in turn for your own paths in your spiritual journeys? If anyone has an answer for that, Mike.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit with Priyank here, that I actually never saw that. I just read right past it. I saw the title, Autobiography of a Yogi, and totally missed that it was underneath. I think it's significant for the devotee in general, right? Because I feel like there is a bit of expectation often to, if you have a fully realized master in front of you, that you want him to do, I don't want to say tricks, but like some miracles or something like that for you, right? And I think that's kind of a sign of deep devotion, is that you don't need that, right? That you say, I'm very faithful to my master. He doesn't have to show me any miracles. And there's this famous story from the Bible, and I want to talk about this a little bit because I actually, when I went to Israel, I went to that place, Capernaum, where those words were uttered. I think the story is that there was like a wealthy nobleman who came to Jesus, and his son was dying, and he came to see Jesus, but he came to him as a last resort because he was desperate. His son was dying. His motivation was not mainly to seek God, but it was just to get this miracle happen. And when Jesus saw him, he said those words. He said, "Except ye see signs and wonders, you will not believe." And then the nobleman says, "Sir, come down, ere my child die." And then Jesus says, "Go thy way, thy son liveth." And of course, then the story goes, the son was healed. And in that place in Capernaum, there's now a chapel where you can go, and there's like a pilgrimage spot where people go.
Wow. And how was it when you went? How was it being there?
The whole trip was a bit overwhelming because I went from pilgrimage site to pilgrimage site the whole time. So it was like another one of those. But I think half an hour later, I was standing with my feet in the River Jordan being baptized, right? So it was a really cool trip. And it was the vibration. You could feel the vibration of Jesus everywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine. Priyank?
Yeah, I was just reading the second, this is Discourse 20 in the second coming of Christ for this section. And it kind of says that the significance in this was that obviously he was this man was seeking divine aid for his son, but the significance for this section was not that Jesus healed him, and look at the powers of Jesus that healed him, because Guruji describes in the explanation that, if God showed himself or manifested himself through his divine powers so explicitly, no one would be required to believe, because they would just see, that divine is right there. But this man who was pleading for the healing, he was actually not just he wasn't a disciple that wasn't very advanced. He was advanced, so he actually came to him with quite a high stature in terms of his own devotion and things like that. And we can see that from when Jesus said to him, "You can go away now. Your son will be healed." Like, the guy didn't even think anything of it. He knew that Christ would heal him, and there was no commotion, kissing Christ's feet and thank you, how will I know, questioning. There was nothing, there was no doubt. It was literally, oh, Christ, the master has spoken, his words are manifest, I'll go my way, which is really nice. It was a unique take, I think, from the explanation that Guruji gave.
Yeah. Chris?
I think, that thread is a bit of a golden thread, in essence, of the relationship of devotee and the guru, isn't it? The faith, and we'll see that in there you go, Priyank showing the guru disciple relationship.
Preparing for my next episode.
Yes, exactly. Which is there? We'll see it in Paramahansa even beyond that with Lihari Mahashaya in the first chapter. So we'll see the powers of healing that can be given, which is really, really amazing. So it's a recurring theme in the path of yoga, isn't it? The absolute trust and faith in your guru would take you very far, very long way.
Yeah, and we see it in the book, don't we, as well? This book is full of signs, it's full of wonders. And I think the quote itself is such a wonderful piece of truth, because it encompasses the seeing and the feeling. I Googled the word wonders because I was quite curious as to the definition, and it's describing a feeling. And seeing is also feeling, which I think is quite an interesting concept. And the fact that it's right there on that front page to say, well, here's all the signs and wonders you need to believe, because they're in these pages, which is so fantastic to begin the biography. So yes, then we go into the introduction, quite a thick old introduction, but a good one to delve into. It was mostly written by the Self-Realization Fellowship themselves, which I think is quite telling. But also it begins with a quote by Dr. Vinay R. Sen, who was the former ambassador of India to the United States. And he had a lovely meeting with Paramahansa Yogananda at one point, and on the Self-Realization Fellowship's website, there is a really wonderful recounting of his visit to Guru. Priyank, would you mind reading what that said for us, please?
Sure. So, from the moment I arrived, I felt as if I had gone back 3,000 years to one of the ancient ashrams we read about in our holy scriptures. Here was the great Rishi, a lumined sage, surrounded by his disciples, all clad in the saffron robes of a sannyasi, renunciant. It seemed an island of divine peace and love in a sea buffeted by the tumult of the modern age.
Wow. Imagine being there. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, was it, really?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it. And it's a lovely testament, I feel. And in that quote that he puts in the introduction, as well as the little paragraph underneath from Self-Realization Fellowship, it's really a testimony, I feel, to Paramahansa Yogananda's character and who he was and what he embodied in spirit, which again is a really nice way to feel us in, to understand who this author is and where these words are coming from. So I wondered, for you three, was there any outstanding part in those two opening paragraphs that really stood out for you about Paramahansa Yogananda or what they wrote? That's my question for you.
The first in the section below it, he says, or whoever wrote this from Self-Realization Fellowship, says, countless readers of this autobiography have attested to the presence in its pages of the same light of spiritual authority that radiated from his person. Now, Guruji told us that, he said, when I am gone, the teachings will be the Guru. And here they're kind of like emphasizing that point. And in reference to how, you know, Dr. Binay Sen, the ambassador, experienced Guruji, I just wanted to mention in our previous series, we talked about him in significant detail in minute 76, if anyone wants to go back. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, so I want to echo that I really found it interesting how Dr. Sen said that Guruji is such a great example of an Indian that goes out there and tells the world about India. And yeah, I mean, you sometimes forget, imagine he would be a representative of your country and he's Paramahansa Yogananda and goes out there. Pride, one feeling that I would feel. And the other thing is how they, there's a lot of newspapers that basically describe how they received the autobiography of a yogi. And when you read that, you see how basically brand new all those concepts were for people who read this. Like now, it might be different. Now there is 1,000 books out about yoga. But back then when people read this, they were like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. And I think the fact that every single newspaper, and they're from all over the world, say the same thing, how this is kind of captivating, inspiring. And also they feel like there's really this feeling, there's this ancient wisdom. It's like somebody translated the Bible finally or something like that. It's like...
Yeah, it is amazing in the context of the time that it didn't get swept under the carpet and banished from humanity. But then I suppose truth speaks, doesn't it? And it hits that chord in people. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah. We said so many times with Guruji's work that it ages well. So, and that's probably what we're talking about there as well. For all the quotes and for all the people that have, you know, talked about Yogananda in such favorable lights, you know, why would they have chosen this one out of all of them? And to me, if you think about what impression you want to give at the beginning of a book, if you're reading it as a complete layperson, which I more or less was when I first picked up the book, not introduced to the ways of the Eastern philosophies, let's say. You've got an ambassador, a former ambassador of India to the United States. It's quite a formal, recognized position in the West. You know, it's quite involved in the structure of the Western political system and economic system and everything. So I don't know. I'm just reading this again and thinking it's probably quite clever to have somebody who's recognized in some way by the Western system to be able to say, hey, this person really represents everything that India stands for. And then the question is, well, what does India stand for? And here's somebody as well, to his credit, that he knows what India stands for. He really knows the essence of the, you know, the spiritual wealth that is in India. And what Yogananda was doing essentially was bringing that wealth over to the West that's bereft of that wealth, has the material wealth, and we're mixing the both of them to try to create a better world. So it kind of fits really well, you know, as a jigsaw puzzle, as it were, fits really well into that and helps the reader that's maybe seen this for the first time, like have that subconscious link between the two. That's what they're trying to do, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because as, you know, a lay person, or even if you're not identified as being spiritual or being on the path yet, you've got, like you say, Chris, you've got that link. It's like a bridge between worlds, right? Which is really great. Priyank.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, it's important to note actually what you said about linking an important person, because to the West, an important position, because this was at a time where this would have been probably the first Indian ambassador to the US post-independence. or if not the first, one of the first. And him, referring to, and as Lauren mentioned, like Guruji was quite recent, these he's talking about ancient rishis, right, of India, which go thousands, if not 10,000s of years. But this rishi, this illumined sage, is recent. And this is the beauty of the having or reading the Self-Realization Fellowship version of the Autobiography of a Yogi, because Self-Realization Fellowship has got a lot of resources and access to a lot of wealth of information that they can make the introduction relevant for today. And this is why probably they have new editions and new prints, because they alter the introduction to cater for that decade or that century, perhaps, because if, for example, I don't know, if it wins a new award in literature in this century, maybe I'm prophesizing it, then they would then add that to the next print edition of the autobiography, and they're in a good place to do that. And in terms of him representing what India stands for and what people wouldn't know, the next few pages, I know we're going to talk about it later, is the eternal law of righteousness, and it really talks about what India stands for and what it is. So I thought that was quite important. Good thread, Chris, threading of this section of the podcast.
We are the source. Just on
weavers,
on
divine weavers.
Weavers, divine weavers. For Dr. Binay, he was the first India's first delegation to the UN in 1947. But he also served several other countries, including Italy, Yugoslavia, Japan, and Mexico. But interestingly, it maybe is worth noting here that he served as Director General of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. And so he really is noted to really have taken that from a data gathering bureaucracy into a major force against world hunger. So somebody who did achieve great things himself.
Yeah, he sort of carries that level of morality, doesn't he? That and compassion and charity that we're all taught to do in our own lives. So yeah, it's really, really great. And then the introduction goes on, doesn't it? Oh yeah, Priyank, before we
it does go on. It does go on. And I've got my red marker out for this will be the first of I don't know how many of my favorite quotes in the book. So the next paragraph talks about they're quoting Lady Mahashaya, who said that a short while after 50 years after my passing, my life will be written about in the West. And then this is where my red marker comes in, because I think this is probably one of the best quotes certainly that SRF produces through the information. It is, Sri Yukteswar says, it will aid in establishing the brotherhood of man, a unity based on humanity's direct perception of the one Father. Wow, I think that is just such a powerful. I can't wait to talk about that. But that's obviously that's in the main body of the autobiography, but they brought it out here because it's such an important quote, isn't it?
Yeah,
especially for today's age and all ages, probably.
Yeah. And it changed the lives of millions, didn't it? Because he relayed that message to Paramahansa Yogananda and said, you must write this book, you must do your part in this mission. And lo and behold, he did. And thank goodness, because if he didn't, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. And I think that says a lot about those that came before us, that we're now able to live our lives as we do now and be here on this podcast even. So it begins after that with a sort of timeline of events, of a history of how this book came to be in fruition, which is really interesting, I think. And again, it sets us up for that. Okay, how did this actually come to be in this world? It didn't appear out of nowhere, it wasn't, materialized out of the ether. It took a process. that was quite of this world. So in 1931, actually, he began writing the book. And when I say he, I mean Paramahansa Yogananda. And in 1937 to 1945, interestingly, most of the book was written. You know, he had lots of duties to do in his own worldly mission. Yes, Priyank.
Sorry, in that same paragraph, Mata quotes that the first chapter she read was the Tiger Swami. And I think, was it in the last episode or the previous one, I asked you guys which chapter would you most tell someone to read, or like someone asked me why should I read it, and I thought, which chapter should I tell this person about, and I said the Tiger Swami. So I'm really pleased that I must be in sync with Dayamata.
Do you know, I was thinking about that because obviously we discussed it before. When I saw it here, I was like, of course. Of course it was going to be that one. And then in 1935 to 1936, so that was between the years that the book was written, Paramahansa Yogananda actually went to India to visit his guru, didn't he, Sri Peshwa? And it was there that he began collating all the stories, the documents, the letters. He contacted disciples, he verified the facts. So everything that went into this book was a real labor of truth finding and of love, which really sets us up for truth. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I it didn't strike me when I first read this. To be honest, I can't really recall what my impressions were when I first read this part of the book. I think I probably was reading it so quickly. I was eager to get into some of the more, some of the main chapter really, that I can't recall too much. But reading it again, my impressions are probably quite different, having become, much more familiar, let's say, with Yogananda. It strikes me that this is a labor of love for him as much as anything, and we see him as an avatar. As a layperson, certainly wouldn't see him that way when reading this book. This is quite normal, as you said, it is really of this world. He's going around collecting the facts and the information and confirming that he has everything correct for the book. And it's, he's doing all the bits that you would imagine somebody would have to. Looking back at this, I have more admiration for him, just by reading this. He's so grounded and humble, and he puts in the work. And I think there's maybe some fanciful idea in my mind that he might just be able to kind of tap into, the ether as an avatar and like pull out, all these facts and figures. But no, he is going about the work and doing it. And if we can take any solace in what we have to do in our daily lives, that maybe the more mundane things, Yogananda is showing, hey, like this is what I've done to build what we think is probably the best books of the century, if not more. You surely can do your work with humility too in this world. It's a lovely lesson. Looking back at this now that I know what I know now, it's quite nice.
Mike?
I think the fact that he went back to also compile the facts probably was also one of the reasons why it was important for him to bring a camera, to have the car, to bring Richard Wright, who wrote a lot of things down on the trip, right? So I think that was probably planned even before he was going to India. He was like, okay, when I go there, I need to. This is one of the missions in India, is to kind of tie up all the loose ends and get all the material needed for the book.
Mm-hmm. And it would have been quite an undertaking, wouldn't it? Because at the time, it's not as if today you can Google such and such's name, or you can, phone somebody up. At that time, although telephones were invented, they weren't actually widely used in India. I actually had quite a big research. I just am very curious about the world. So I was researching about telephones. So I was thinking practically, actually, how would he have done this? And it turns out that actually in India at that time, telephones weren't really widely used. And so he would have physically had to have found those people through word of mouth, through knowledge of others. And I think, again, it really shows us how much dedication went into this book. You know, even though he was obviously a great yogi and was able to have much understanding in this world, he didn't use that. He did what any other person would do and physically went to find it, which says a lot. Yeah, Chris.
Can I just say as well, whenever I was rereading this again, it maybe didn't strike me at the time, but there's a lot of terminology in here that if you're a layperson, you haven't come across this Eastern philosophy, this whole new world. There's a lot of words in here that you would probably have to go and look up if you were really meticulous, which I, to be fair, probably wasn't at the time. But it felt like I was coming home in some way when I first read this. You know, you're talking about the words yogi, you know, Shri, G for, you know, Paramahansa G. Like what do these words and letters, additional letters mean, like Swami and Yoga Avatar? These are all new words. You know, many people are reading this for the first time. And if they're anything like me, who was, you know, didn't have that in their vocabulary really before they were reading this book, but they maybe have had in a previous life or something, who knows, it was like a homecoming. So reading this, it was almost like you know, I'm back. It was almost like that kind of a feeling for me when I was reading that for the first time. So going over this again and doing this exercise was really sweet, you know, to remember, like, wow, you know, that it was super refreshing to kind of read all these words that, you know, maybe it was an echo of a past life or something like that. But if you haven't seen this before at all, there's going to be lots of words in there that you wouldn't understand.
G means gangster, doesn't it, Chris? Whenever you say G.
It's like, you know, Don something, yeah, in mafioso terms.
Don Pablo.
The language is immense, though, isn't it, in the book? I mean, I have to have Google Dictionary up whenever I read this book or any of his writings, because his breadth of language is incredible. And you sort of think, you know, for someone who wasn't from, you know, England or America, especially at the time that he was born in, amazing, really. Yeah, Mike.
The way Guruji lived his life, I don't think he cut any corners by using some intuition. Like, he put in the labor each and every time he did anything. I heard one of the brothers said once that Guruji had like a dictionary with him at all times, and he would make sure every day that he would find a few words that he doesn't know and repeat them over and over again each day and try to use them in sentences. And that way he would gradually expand his vocabulary. And today, when we draft a paper or we write a book, we have, like, we just go online and we find all those references super fast. But I mean, I'm just going to give away my age now, but when I did school assignments in high school, I sat at the library, right? And then I went there and I talked to the librarian and said, oh, I'm going to write a paper about blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, oh, use this book and also this and this and this. And then you sit down with like a pile of books.
Good old days, the good old days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or you go through the newspaper archive, right? on anything. So this was like a major undertaking. You would sit there for hours to find tiny bits of information and then compile them. And I mean, this was also a reason why he couldn't do it alone. He needed helpers and he needed people who help him compile everything. And it's such a masterwork, everything. And I don't believe he cut any corners. So every single word they were looking up in some book and cross-referenced, and yeah, amazing.
It's a real example, actually, for us all, isn't it? It shows that, yeah, we can't cut corners and we have to dedicate ourselves and do the work and go an extra 1,000 million miles if we want something to be. And I think especially as this was prophesied by a great master, it had to be. There was no question. But I do often wonder how sometimes he did it when perhaps the road was rough. I think you talked about this in the Awake documentary as well. You know, sometimes he felt like giving up. and running away to the Himalayan mountains, but he never did. And I think we can all take that for our own lives.
Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, literally, thank God that he didn't. So yeah, the book goes on and sort of gives us a timeline. So I thought we'd run through it so our listeners can understand how this came to be. So after he'd been in India and was with his guru and finding out all these facts, he returned to the USA in 1936. And in 1939 or 1940, he concentrated full time on the book. But he had the assistance of Taramata, who was his editor, and very fondly, he felt very fondly towards Taramata, and Sri Dayamata, Ananda Mata, and Sraddha Mata. If I'm saying any of those incorrectly, please do correct me. Yes, Priyank.
Yes, no, I like your pronunciation. Yeah, Shraddha. It's the Western pronunciation of Indian names is always good fun. But yeah, these are eminent people in the organization. I mean, we talked about Dayamata. You know, we did a whole episode dedicated to her in minute 53. You know, she was the second president of SRF, and this is Taramata. And then she says, my sister here was Mrinalini Mata, Ananda Mata, and Shraddha Mata. These are all obviously really important to Self-Realization Fellowship in the early years. And we actually did dedicated whole episodes to them in minute 53, 54, and 67. So if you want to know more about those illustrious lives and the influence they've had, then I'd suggest you go there.
Yeah. Yeah. They really did labor with him, didn't they, on this book. There was a lovely quote actually from Dayamata, which I'd love to read, which says, his divine intent was to share the joy and revelations encountered in the company of saints and great masters, and in one's own personal realization of the divine. Which is, wow. Really, yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, and related to that, in the main intro text, she wrote that like when he used to write, he'd often pause and his gaze would be uplifted and his body would be motionless, wrapped in the samadhi state, and the whole room would be filled with a tremendous, powerful aura of divine love. And can you just imagine being in that room? But that kind of tells you that, firstly, his divine stature, and secondly, the work that he's undertaking and putting pen to paper is like a scripture for, you know, a timeless scripture that's being written in front of their very eyes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The spiritual upliftment that must have been felt just even in his presence. But imagine in writing this book, you are in that room, you are helping that process. Just the mind almost can't comprehend. It's just that feeling of like awe and wonderment. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I think that this point is really the key takeaway for me from the opening, the preface of, you know, that we covered in the last episode, and in this introduction as well. It's not all about Yogananda, and you know, it's his face, it's him who you see, and you know, he's the author of this book. But as Evans Waltz said at the beginning in the preface, that it's a book written by a yogi about yogis, and that's the whole premise really of SRF. It's universal. You know, all religions. You know, this is a universal teaching. This is not about, you know, purely Hinduism, or not about, you know, the Christianity. It's actually about everything, the thing that connects everything. So Yogananda is there as a channel. He's the conduit to you know, to, like you said, to build the bridge. But he's so selfless, isn't he? And it's just such a beautiful thing. Like we talked more about, you know, Sri Yukteswarji in the preface, and there it was, like, you know, Yogananda wanted it there. It's one of the first things he talks about in chapter 1, which, you know, we'll go into in the next episode. But it is such a beautiful thing that the takeaway is really, it's a service. He's he's doing.
Yeah.
It's the main takeaway for me. Such a lovely thing.
It's such a selfless book, isn't it? Even though it's deemed an autobiography, it's not. It's actually a dedication to all that came before, which is quite amazing. And he finished the book, didn't he, in 1945, which is really not that long ago. It really hit me. So I was like, wow, it's not even been 100 years. And how much has reached the hearts of so many people around the world. But I love the quote in the book where Paramahansa Yogananda joyously exclaims this line when he's finished writing. Chris, would you mind reading what he said?
Yes. Forgive me, the direction. Is it in
all
history?
Done. It is finished.
Oh, cool.
This book will change the lives of millions. It will be my messenger when I am gone. Is that the bit you're talking about, Laura?
That is the bit.
Yes.
See that, Chris? In tune. I think you need to work on this synchronicity.
I see it now, if that counts, which obviously it doesn't. But it is awesome though, isn't it? That he clearly knew, as we talked about in an episode before, that he could do more by reaching others through his pen than he could through his spoken word at the time, because he knew he could foresee, the power of technology and everything that's going to be able to really amplify this message to no end. So
yeah. I also love that notion of how joyous he was to say, it's done, and that feeling he must have felt to be like, now's the beginning of something else. Mike.
Also, the medium of the book is something interesting. It has been there thousands of years ago, and it will probably still be there in 1,000 years. And so you write a book, you put all your wisdom in there, you build an organization that will keep printing it as long as necessary.
You don't think in the future it will be like podcasts, just 100% podcasts?
Yeah, but the podcast will be about the book, right? So the book is at its core, it's powering the whole spiritual revolution. And that's kind of what books have been doing always. It's so fascinating that we have all this technology changed so much over such a long time, but books have basically always been there.
I think it's that physical element, isn't it? It's that thing inside us all which connects us back to a very long time ago, where we have this physical thing in our hands. And there's something, for me at least, when I read a book, I feel like the messages are much more able to sink into my consciousness than if I read it via a device. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but there's something in a book, it's also very tactile, isn't it? So but yeah, they I think we talked about this in a previous episode, but the lengths it took for Taramata to find a publisher to get this book published. We did talk about it, didn't we? I'm not just
yeah, we did. Yes,
yeah, we did, and how it came to be. Yeah, Mike.
I imagine this to be like a major event of positivity happening in the world. You have to imagine all this bad karma that tries to keep it from happening. So I'm guessing there was probably a lot of little things where it didn't work out in the beginning. They had to do it again and again to actually get it out there. Can only imagine. I mean, of course, if you have Guruji on your side, it will happen definitely. But pretty sure in the beginning, the world was like, no.
Well, yeah. I mean, she had to live in awful conditions for about a year, didn't she, just to try and get this book into physical fruition, which she eventually did, and it was published by the Philosophical Library, wasn't it? Priyank.
Yeah, she did. Taramata, I don't know if I just put a picture of her on the introduction tile of our Trello. She's got such a serene, devotional aura, doesn't she? Such a pure pure-looking soul. And Guruji, in the intro, he says, like, accepting my Guru Sri Yukteswar, there's no one with whom I've enjoyed more talking about Indian philosophy. That is quite a good testimony, isn't it? That's quite.
I love
quite
that
a good account. But hard work in terms of getting the book published through the Philosophical Library she deserves a lot of credit. But the Philosophical Library itself is also, you should say, deserves some credit for publishing it, because they've published some phenomenal books. They've published books for 22 Nobel Prize winners, apparently.
Are they still around?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And then publishing this book, regardless of what happens to them as an organization, now that they're down in history as one of the most important organizations for publishing.
Yeah. Chris?
Just to linger on what Mike said a little bit more, if I can, and what Yogananda said, that this book changed the lives of millions. The only reason why, as he said, it could come through because of the karma is because of the karma of the millions as well. Like you said, well, with Yogananda there pushing it through, yes, absolutely. At the head of the helm, there's Yogananda, driving it through. But the millions of people like us, like, a small part that we have to play in this, that have cried out with our souls to know God and, to have a guru to, lead us there in the path. That really has to be noted from my understanding, that when the world demands it, then God will send the gurus. God will send those people to guide these millions, the devotees to Him. So that's really what our Guru Paramahansa Yogananda and the line of gurus were there ready and waiting for us to demand it. Because otherwise, they could be sitting in bliss for, in the Himalayan mountains forever, couldn't they? Or in the astral worlds. So Yogananda is saying, change yourself, and you can change the lives of many. And it's really with that principle, isn't it, that we can all manifest this divinity in this world together, and we have to do it, all of us. Yeah,
that's very potent, Chris. I feel like there's not much to add to that, because that's enough what you've said, But yeah, there was
Jai Guru.
Yeah, Jai Guru to that. But there was a great spiritual togetherness with everyone that came to put this book into the world. They had a real mission and they accomplished it, and they still are, which I think is really important. And it's quite telling as to what can be done when souls come together with a shared mission and a value. Just think if one or more persons decided, no, like would this actually be here today? So it's quite profound that it's sitting here with us, and it's sat in Mount Washington. The books were delivered, weren't they, in 1946, which must have been such a great time when it was delivered to the doorstep. And yes, whilst that did happen, there were later revisions and additions, as we've talked about before, and they actually added an additional chapter in 1951, which was written by Paramahansa Yogananda. We won't delve into that just yet. There is a quote from it at the end of the introduction, but I feel like let's delve into that when we get there in the book.
Is that the one with the large family?
I think so. Let's have a look.
Oh no, that's fine. That's not spoiler.
No, it's not. Spoiler alert.
Okay.
We won't do that yet.
Oh, yeah.
But apparently it's still on bestseller list now, 60 years later. It's millions of readers. Why do you think that is? Do you think?
Timeless.
Timeless.
The knowledge is timeless.
And also the impact it has made is not done yet. I feel like their spirituality is still I don't want to call it niche, but it is still not taken over the world in a way that I would imagine it will at some point. There is still a lot of people who are seeking and haven't found, and so I think this will continue being on bestseller lists for some years, or some decades, or some centuries to come.
Absolutely, yeah. There's something on the tip of my brain that I'm trying to remember, but I think it's in this book, basically saying that Paramahansa Yogananda's mission was to deliver each soul back home to God, and he would not. Someone help me out here, but he basically wouldn't stop until that mission was complete. So
yeah, that poem that I'll ply my boat time and time again,
yes,
not till every last soul is reached at home.
Yeah, it's like you say, Mike, that the book is not done yet. There's trillions of souls left. But yeah, there's also a lovely story in the book, which I found very joyous. It's something that I didn't actually realize was there until I was, reading the introduction again for the episode. And I wondered, Mike, if you'd be able to recount the story of the Soviet Union readers for us.
Yeah, so, well, Soviet Union readers, I'm not sure if we have any more of those these days.
No, but at the time.
Yeah, at the time, yeah. So there was this judge, his name was V.R. Krishna Iyer, if I said his name correctly. And he was in somewhere near St. Petersburg, and he was at an event, and he would ask people. I think that's a common question that I oftentimes hear when people try to go into the spiritual context, like what happens after death, right? And then to his surprise, the answer was that people there have read the Autobiography of a Yogi. And he was surprised because the whole communism doctrine that was prevalent in the Soviet Union was very materialistic and anti-religious, right? Like it was based on the teachings of Karl Marx, who said religion is opium for the people, right? So it was very surprising, but it also shows that you cannot turn the light off completely. There's always going to be sprinkles of light everywhere. And something that people in the West often don't understand is that I think Russia and India, they have like a connection on many levels. Even during the Cold War, I think India and Russia were much closer than, for example, India and the United States. And I think there is an admiration among Russian people, even during communism, for Indian spirituality. And for example, also the book on the life of Jesus Christ, The Missing 30 Years, was written by a Russian Notovich, right? So there is definitely a whole kind of spiritual movement under the rug in in Russia, and yeah, and even during Soviet days.
I think it also goes to show that there are truth seekers all over the world. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're from. There'll always be that thing in you that is curious to seek more. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, in this story, it is interesting, the dynamic, because the question was, quite open, and it was to a group of professors. And then one professor quietly, went inside a room, came back with Autobiography of a Yogi. And I guess it kind of speaks to like the underground truth. And I've heard truth has a long arch. And that is something that the Soviet Union went through, I think, under Stalin, but maybe before that, this big period of atheism, I think, right? And they kind of have that maybe to this day. But there's the Autobiography of Yogi maybe being accepted, as they said it is. They accept it as the authenticity of everything recorded in this book. They really just accept everything, and that is, would you say, maybe quite parallel to what was going on at the time. So no matter how dark times might be, there's always that bit of light and flame, as you said. So it is actually really lovely that they chose to include that at the beginning of this book. It really shows, if you want to try to get a message across to an audience reading this for the first time, like, hey, it's really powerful stuff, because that, I don't know, may have gotten you in some trouble within certain circles at the time, possibly. I don't know. So yeah, they've chosen a right number of strong messages here in the beginning of the book to try to get this across, like, hey, there's something really deep and meaningful that you're about to experience. So get ready.
Yeah, there is a lot actually in the introduction, isn't there? And I feel like there's something for everyone. In some way, there might just be a line that stands out, or a little story like this one that speaks to your heart. And I'm really interested, was there anything for you in the introduction that particularly stood out when you read it and made you go, oh? Yeah, Mike, what were you going to say?
One particularly high praise is from Professor Ashutosh Das, if I say the name correctly. He said that basically just those words. He says, the Autobiography of a Yogi can be regarded as Upanishads of the New Age. I mean, this is like the highest praise that you can give. I mean, we often refer to the book as scripture in this podcast, and this is kind of what he does here in a very referential way.
Absolutely, yeah. Chris,
we're obviously reading this book almost 100 years or so on, and it really, they talk about that in this in this part, where this is a significant amount of time in the course of a human lifetime, but really it's a small amount of time in the course of humanity, and an even smaller amount of time in the course of the world and the universe. But for me, they chose a few good quotes and stories to put in here. The New Frontier, which is a metaphysical journal, they included a quote from that. Dr. Frawley, the director of the American Institute, and they said essentially that Yogananda was the father of yoga in the West. To us, that's really significant, because yoga is, I would like to actually, as a thought experiment, go and find, what is it, online you can see how many times a certain word has been used, and it shows you the track data on that on the internet, and see when yoga really was started to be used, because that is true. But yoga is in our vocabulary now, and they're saying essentially, hey guys, this is because of Paramahansa Yogananda, the person on the front page of this book. You're about to read something that is now fundamental to our lives, mindfulness and well-being, yoga. Like, these things are all interconnected, and here we have somebody who's really who's the cornerstone of that, almost, in the West. So yeah, they've chosen all the right words, all the right quotes for me in this book.
Yeah, been very, very well placed, hasn't it, Priyank?
Mike, did you find out about that history of the word yoga?
I looked, of course, I went on the Ngram viewer, Google's Ngram viewer, and there was a significant uptick from the 20s all the way to the 60s, when it went even more exponential. Then it plateaued a bit during the 70s, and then since the 90s, it went into an exponential growth.
Yeah, that's when young Priyank came to the West.
That's when Priyank came to the West.
There you go. It's all revealed now.
I had the word yoga emblazoned on my chest and tattooed on my forehead. No, I joke, I kid, of course. But there's a few of the newspaper quotes that I really like. I'll just read out. There's one which says, there has been nothing before written in English or in any other language like this presentation of yoga. Is in Columbia University Press, and also from the New York Times, or it says, Yogananda's book is rather an autobiography of the soul than the body. And I thought that was really profound concept, considering how many incarnations we may have had to take to actually get to a position where we can imbibe or absorb or even put into practice some of the Guruji's, words. He says, like, even if you just take in 1% of what I'm saying to you, you'll make it. He says something along those lines, which is quite cool. Chris?
Yeah. I'm kind of having one of those moments where you just want to be silent and just kind of meditate on it a little bit, but just thinking about this.
That's not suitable for podcasting.
It's not suitable for podcasting. Yeah, you have to talk.
We have to put off that meditation instinct.
Should we just have a 5-minute silent podcast? Yeah, but it is something that, going back, I was, let's say, lost in the desert and just thirsty as heck. And when you're reading this, you're salivating at the mouth, let's say, or you're just the hunger that you might have as somebody who in my position was just seeking this with all of my heart and soul. Reading the intro, I think, like I said earlier, I was just trying to read it really quickly because I just knew I needed to get to Yogananda's words, and I just needed to get to it. So they're kind of teasing you really, really, really well with all this. You're like, just get, I really want to get to it. And really, it's very exciting to read everything, I think, including here, because it is very notable, and it did achieve notoriety from many people, well, from all different backgrounds, throughout the past 100 years. So, but I do remember just reading this, thinking, like, I really, really want to get to the whole chapter. I almost couldn't wait by this point, by the time I read a few of these quotes.
Yeah, I get like that a lot when I read a book. I often really want to skim past the introduction. I have to remind myself that there's an introduction for a reason, and there's lots in there that needs to be read. But just going off what you were saying, Chris, I do feel like this book reaches each person at the right time for their own journey. And I'm always really interested to, like, I know we've talked about this, but know when people found the book and how, and it's very intriguing. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah. There's also the good section in the notes, in the footnotes, which is something that we're going to talk a lot about in the autobiography, because the footnotes are actually, if you take just the footnotes, the footnotes alone are long enough to form a book. But there's some gold. Yeah. There's some gold in there. And we were talking last time about, the rumors about the A missing from Paramahansa to Paramahansa, and in the footnotes, it's actually explained here. And I thought, similar to what we were talking about in the past, but I thought it was in footnote 3. But I thought it was important that they defined what Hansa means, or Paramahansa, because Hans means swan, and in the footnote it talks about one who has attained the highest realization of his true divine self, and the unity of self with spirit is what was referred to as swan, in that swan like. But in our experiences with swans, and in India and scriptures, swans have a important place, symbolically, whatever you say that word, because obviously we see them as pure. You look at their unruffled, pristine feathers, you see complete purity. But there's this concept where, like, a swan may be gracefully gliding along the water, but underneath its feet are working tirelessly to get to that velocity. So that kind of symbolizes how hard we need to work in our lives, even though we may be gracefully going along it, but we have to work every moment to maintain our discipline and think of God and all those beautiful things. And there's also a mystical element, that is that swans are able, if you mix milk and water, so goes Indian thought that swans are able to just extract the milk from that mix. Yeah, which is quite a cool thought. And you can read about that online, about various experiments and stuff that have been done. But yeah, that's the India. But in the symbologically, that means that someone needs to correct how I say that word. So I don't
I'm not sure either, which is why I haven't said.
Symbolically.
Is there not symbologically? No,
I don't think
symbolically.
So.
Okay.
Well, you've made a new word now.
Symbolically. So symbolically, the swan being able to decipher between milk and water is that for us in our lives, we need to, sort of see the wood from the trees and be able to decipher the truth from untruth and extract the purest parts of life and make them our own. So I think it's really nice that they put this little section in the notes. And we were obviously we're talking about the spelling of Paramahansa and Sanskrit and stuff before in the previous episode. So this rounds it off quite nicely.
I can just imagine a lot of people now running down to the park with pails of milk and water, testing out the swans. Does it work?
Hopefully they use soy milk and not cow's milk.
Doesn't work with soy milk, Priyank.
Don't underestimate
your hippie methods.
Don't underestimate the swan, man.
And we're greeted, aren't we, after the introduction ends with the eternal law of righteousness, which is really interesting because I don't know about you all, but when I first got to this, I was sort of, why is this here? I just sort of wanted to just skim past it and, like you, Chris, just get into the book. So it's quite interesting that it's placed here. For anyone who hasn't read the book, it's basically an explanation of the flag of the newly independent India in 1947. And it goes on to describe the flag of India itself. And it has that Dharma Chakra wheel of law, which was actually a reproduction which appeared on a stone pillar, which was erected in the 3rd century by Emperor Asoka.
Asoka.
Which was Asoka, sorry.
Yes, Asoka,
which was BC, so before Christ, which very interesting. And what really hit me, I was researching about this man and also what it says here in the text, and it seemed to me that he was a real embodiment of morality and of goodness and benevolence and charity and all of these qualities that we are really trying to bring forth in our own lives, and what Paramahansa Yogananda stood for too. So I think having this representation so clearly next to the introduction is like, well, this is what India stands for. And it was said that, how do I pronounce it? Priyank, his name?
Asoka.
Asoka. He sort of realized the error of his ways and was horror-stricken by what they had done, and then went forth to rectify those wrongs, which is really interesting. But yeah, I wondered if any of you had any thoughts as to why this is here or what it gave you. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I had a thought on this, that I considered the reader, and the reader may be that of somebody in the West, and the people in the West tend to be, I wouldn't say ignorant, but a little bit coerced into knowing certain histories over others. So when I was reading this, I thought, wow, this is a nice, glimpse, a window into the history of India. That's essentially what I felt this was. And you read it and you think, oh, well, I didn't know about this. Wow, that's very interesting. There must be so much more that I maybe don't know, or I think the depth of wealth that India has contributed to the world, whether it be through mathematics, not just spirituality, but so many areas, that I think that this is a nod to that, to say, hey, it's not all about maybe what you may have heard in the classrooms, because India has so much to give the world. So to me, it was maybe that kind of nationalistic idea to say, there's been many great people in India, and you're going to learn a lot on this journey, I'd say. And it kind of cements India's history in the Western eyes in some ways.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't considered that before, but I feel like that's really what's happening here, isn't it? It's that opening up of our perspectives. Yeah, Mike.
I think it's also a message within to the Indian population to show the wheel of Dharma. I mean, the wheel of Dharma has like significance, I think, in many different ways. And yeah, of course, Ashoka might have been one of the most recent examples of the Indian Empire, how it's envisioned, right? How this is the ideal, how India sees itself, how it wants to be. And an interesting aspect there is religion, because India today, but also thousands of years ago, was never a homogeneous area. There were always many different languages. There were always many different religions. And Ashoka was definitely a patron of Buddhism, but he also tried to create an environment where other religions were able to live together peacefully. And I think that might also be one of the aspects that the modern India should incorporate.
Priyank?
Yeah, agreed, Mike. Yes, it's also the Ashoka is much loved. He's one of the most loved of the Indian emperors of the ancient times, and we still learn about him in the history classes in India. But he also, like, in this section, as we said before, like it started with the doctor, or the ambassador, Dr. Sen, talking about the history of India and how Guruji stands parallel, at least shoulder to shoulder with all those greats. And here, as Chris said, like especially in the 1940s or whatever, you might be like Guruji would promote India. He did promote India. He loved India, and the West are often dismissive, even now, dismissive of some cultures and some countries, and they don't know about the ancient histories of some of these countries. A lot of emphasis is placed on Rome and ancient Egypt, etc., and their conquering capabilities. But it shows here, and Ashoka shows in his reign, the more important aspect, which is to be a nation that's at peace and doesn't have this thirst for just unlimited expansion. And his reign was marked by its level of peace, and he's denounced war. And if you think about all those civilizations in that time, who ever heard of a conqueror that denounced war and embraced peace and made that a culture of their civilization? It's just unheard of, and it's so important for today to think about that as a concept and as like a modus operandi of how to run a civilization.
We have so much to learn from India, so much. I feel like if we as a collective operated from those standpoints, the world would be a much joyous, peaceful, healthier, thriving place. But alas, we are here and there's more work to be done. Chris?
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote that's in the Bible: "The blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And the kind of Western interpretation of that is meek is like weak, or the meek are some feeble kind of aspects. But the actual meaning really is that, the person who keeps the sword sheathed, like, who is a warrior essentially, but chooses not to use or wield that power, would be somebody who is of this background, where okay, there's a better way to do things. So yeah, it's in the Bible there as well. It's such words of wisdom.
Wow. Mike?
A tiny spoiler, but later on in the book, Guruji will describe a dialogue between Alexander the Great and Dardanis, an Indian, I would say maybe saint or renunciant. And in that dialogue, you already see, like, because I learned history in Austria, in Europe. I guess we learn it the same as a lot of people in the West, right? We look at all the wars and whoever won was the good guy, because history is written by the victors, right? And how he basically shows how this is very a troubled man, Alexander, who is seeking on the inside, who is not happy, right? Who has the strongest army in the world, but what is he looking for? He's looking for wisdom. He's looking for realization.
Yeah, because if we were truly content, we would not go to war, right? Yeah. Wow. So yeah, after we've had all of this lovely introduction and law of righteousness, we're then presented with the title page, which was quite exciting. I feel like this is where it really begins. You know, it's like, oh, you've read all of that. You're like, okay, now we're getting to it. And then you turn it and you see a lovely, what seems to be a hand-drawn map of India prior to 1947. And it's quite interesting. I particularly have quite a fondness for it being there before the text begins. I feel that it really provides that, again, that reality of this was India at the time. Physically, this is where we are. And I think for those geographical lovers among us, if they saw particular like places in the book, you could, I never did, but you could go back and have a look at, okay, well, where was this situated? I'm quite intrigued, actually. I'm not sure as to who drew this map. Does anyone know? If you do, let me know. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, no, I don't know who drew it, actually. Maybe it was a popular one, but he's certainly picked a pertinent one, because I feel that he actually, I think, commissioned this drawing of this India map because everything in, like, a lot of these places that are mentioned in this map are talked about directly in the book. So, for example, there's two places. Taxila is a place, and Mohenjo-daro is a place, but not really a place that's famous for its location in terms of like its city or whatever, but actually because of its history. Mohenjo-daro was part of the Indus Valley civilization, and Guruji talks about that. And Taxila was one of the ancient universities, and Guruji talks about that in the book as well. So like, I think this like especially for people like me, it allows you to reference. For example, if he went from Bombay, then he went to Varda to meet Gandhi, we can see how far away that was in terms of like the geography of India. And then, like, he's obviously in Bengal and Calcutta, and if he's going to Puri, how far that away, you know, how far away is Benares, etc. So it's important, I think, to see geographically some of these places, because, you know, when his mother passed away, he was actually quite far away from home, for example, and you can see that in that.
Yeah,
and there's a cool little picture of Mount Everest as well.
Is there? Oh yes, I haven't noticed that before. Oh, that's really sweet. But it's nice to have that visual representation, especially because some people are visual learners, and that's how they really soak in the information. So yeah, it's great to have that there. Chris?
It's so delicately done with the the India print. It's got these like swirls around the A, kind of comes around and links with the I, which is really beautifully done. And then there's these kind of loops around this line between the I and the A. Nice. It's really, really quite artistically and tastefully done. But on the note of what you're both saying, really, what it is missing, unless I'm blind, is it's like a kilometer or mile key of sorts to say, okay, well, this is how much distance it is, because India is huge. So, you know, you're looking at this thinking, well, you know, okay, I know India is meant to be a big place, but it is vast. You know, coming from Northern Ireland, where everything is so small, you know, this is gigantic in comparison, and it really might enforce the vastness and the history and the depth and wealth of Indian heritage, because there's what, 1 billion people in India today, and it's going to play a massive role on the stage of the world, thankfully, in the coming century. It's really going to come into its own as well. It's really going to play a significant role. So yeah, really nice to see this map.
I also think we have to see this also in the context of 1945, where not everybody had a map of India at their disposal. And maybe some people at this point saw this for the first time. You know, like now when I read the Autobiography of a Yogi and they talk about a little place, I have this weird habit. I always just go on Google Maps quickly and just look where it is, because this is something you can do today, right? And then you look at the map and you think, oh yeah, there's the place, and there's and this is the road. And back then, you had no idea about India. You had, first of all, I mean, you know, I don't want to be that guy, but like, you know, those kind of, when you ask Americans where is Sweden, and they point all over the map, right? And
Jamaica.
But I'm not saying I don't want to say this in a negative way, but it's just, why would you care? There's a country on the other end of the world. You just don't know anything about it, right? And then Guruji talks about all those little places. And you, like Priyank said, you go on this map, think, oh, he was here, and he went from here to here, right? And one thing I hadn't even noticed, like Priyank just mentioned it, that Taxila is on this map. I was like, oh my God, I was always wondering where this actually was. It makes sense, like an ancient university in the mountains of Kashmir. Yeah, and also Guruji kept wanting to go to the Himalayas. He took the train, he went to Hardwar, right? And in Hardwar, they kind of found him and brought him back. So, oh, this is where this is, right? And he was basically halfway to where he wanted to go.
Yeah. Chris?
When you reflect on what we've talked about, what content has been in the preface and the introduction, we really come away with the impression that Yogananda is a true ambassador of this beautiful country. And when you say, Mike, I agree with you, maybe at the time, you put yourself in the shoes of many, many people, why would they care? But actually, to those who are reading this book, they care deeply. And you can see from these touches that, you know, the SRF and Yogananda have done, care deeply about, and they love India deeply. And so it's actually presenting these things in a very loving, caring way. It's like, hey, we're really, really proud of India, and it's putting that on the world stage in a caring, loving way. That it's awesome. It kind of cements the message for me that here's something that's taken the time, and you know, it's done in a very artistic way. It's just a lovely touch, and it really does bring home that message of building that bridge between the West and the East and the East and the West. Like, here's something we're very familiar with, like Yogananda is very familiar with, and we're presenting it to you. You know, it's like an introduction. It's like literally, you're literally introducing India to many people who wouldn't have been exposed to it in the West because of various reasons. But yeah, it's done in a very, very caring way.
And from that, so much has followed on, hasn't it? As Priyank's going to share with us some little tidbits.
Yeah, we're pretty much at the end of the intro, actually. So now we can actually, in the next episode, finally begin with the line 1, chapter 1, line 1, paragraph 1 of the autobiography. So we have to apologize to our listeners and viewers for such a long episode, but we wanted to make sure we covered all these preparatory sections of the autobiography, which are quite important. And I'm sure you'll agree that they're quite important for context building and for you to get the most fruit juice nectar out of the next section of our podcast. Interestingly, someone in our introductory episode said, I confess I haven't read the Autobiography of a Yogi, but they are committed to watching or listening to our podcast. And then someone else asked how, yeah, I know, quite nice. Someone else asked, how do I, give us homework. So perhaps that's something we can work on. Yes, homework. But certain essential homework has to be that you have to read. So we're gonna in the section of the autobiography that we're covering for that episode, we're gonna make it obvious which section we're covering. So for example, chapter 1 we've split into 6 sections. And we're going to make it obvious which sections of the autobiography we're covering in that episode. This could change, so let's see how it goes. But essentially, you'll have to, at the very least, read that section of the autobiography that we're about to talk about. Otherwise, you won't get the most out of it, I don't think. You'll come with us on the journey, but you won't be with us. You'll just be spectators as opposed to with us, and actually taking something hopefully with you and actually being able to contribute as well, because we want to hear feedback. So if you don't want to read, I know some people don't like to read text. Ben Kingsley is this wonderful human being who has got an even more wonderful voice, who has narrated the Autobiography of a Yogi for Self-Realization Fellowship, and it is quite possibly the best sounding narration that I've ever heard of any book, any audio book. So I'd highly recommend you hear the Ben, if you don't want to read, you hear at least the Ben Kingsley narration of the Autobiography of Yogi, because it's fantastic. Ben Kingsley played Gandhi in that famous film in 1980s, I think it was. So you'll know him if you look at his face. But his voice is very, very, very lovely, a bit like Chris's. He's got some Indian heritage, so he's able to pronounce words beautifully.
Unlike Lauren.
No, wouldn't say that.
He's just trying to embarrass me. That's all the word.
I couldn't even say symbological. So yeah, we're all learners.
His father was Indian, right?
Something like that. Yeah, Chris?
I'm doing a quick search of Ben Kingsley books that he's narrated. There are many. I'm just doing a quick scroll through here on religions, and he must be very very closely affiliated with this category, let's say, of books, because this is something that he's done time and time and again. So I'm sure for him, this is something very close to his heart and soul. Yes. And what an honor to bring that to the world himself. Yeah.
Definitely. And he starts from the preface, so you won't get to hear all the intro bits. So he starts with the preface and then chapter 1. So that's where he starts. But yeah, so that's the structure. So next episode we'll be going into the autobiography. Yay! Well done.
So what part of chapter 1 are we going to be talking about, Priyank?
So chapter 1, part 1. So this is, you can prepare. So we'll be going through the first 7 paragraphs. So from literally my parents and early life is the chapter. The characteristic features of an Indian culture have long been a search for the ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. That's obviously where we'll start. And I've got I went to the London Centre today, and I've got the little book that this is by Mrinalini Mata, the Guru-Disciple Relationship. So if you want to do even more homework, my friends, read this book first, and then also read that section of the autobiography. But we're going to read the first 7 paragraphs, and it's going to end at all the odd memories of infants are not extremely rare. During travels in numerous lands, I have heard very early recollections from the lips of voracious men and women. So all of those sections, first 1 or 2 pages. But we'll make that clear. Yeah, we'll make that clear in the description of the episode to come.
Yeah. Chris?
And on the note of doing homework, I think it's fair to say if you are going to follow along and refresh memory, maybe you've read it once or twice or 3 times plus, many people have. If you're going to read along with us, do consider that if you were sitting here, talking as we're talking, what would you want to talk about? What would you focus on? And if we miss anything, if we don't cover whatever it is that's on your mind, maybe share that with us. Feel free. So that's a little bit of homework if you want to make notes of your impressions and takeaways. If you think about any links that you would go to or anything like that, as we do just on this podcast, please do feel free, because it'll add so much color, and we can all share in later episodes if you do spot something that we maybe miss.
Absolutely. I love how one person asked about homework and now we're all jumping on the homework bandwagon. And speaking of homework, I'm going to give us some more homework now for all of our listeners. I was actually going to leave this until we got to it in the end chapter, but the lovely Priyank reminded me that this might be a lovely end to our episode today. So our homework for us and for our listeners is to let these words sink in, and perhaps share your insights if you so wish. It's from the end part of the introduction, and it's taken from the final chapter, which was added in 1951, I believe. And it says, God is love. His plan for creation can be rooted only in love. Does not that simple thought, rather than erudite reasonings, offer solace to the human heart? Every saint who has penetrated to the core of reality has testified that a divine universal plan exists, and that it is beautiful and full of joy.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.